Hi everyone. I think honestly what an incredible last 2 days that we've had here. I know I for one have been entirely inspired, particularly around the personalisation of tech. I think that's just incredible as someone who has my wearable on every day. But yes, I'm here to talk to you about online abuse in sport, and I think we can all agree it's a pervasive issue, not just in sport, but maybe in politics, in our sort of society, and all around. So I'm going to talk you through what I do at the FIA, and what does this look like really from a human perspective as well. And I'm trying to multitask with my iPad and also the screen, so there might be a bit of a delay in me changing that. So as my introduction said, I'm the lead of this campaign. It started a couple of years ago now, and really it was founded off a terrible story that happened in our own sport. So back in 2022 at the Austin Grand Prix, one of our very own female race stewards suffered horrendous abuse. These were physical threats, sexual threats. It wasn't even just threats to her, it was also to her friends and her family. And really at that point, as a global governing body, we turned to look at what does the legal infrastructure look like here? What does it look like from a regulatory point of view, and what support exists? And short thing is, there wasn't really anything out there. Now we've seen the advent of the Online Safety Act, Digital Services Act, but really from a governing body's point of view, we didn't know how to respond to this. And my authority to sort of talk on this topic is, like my intro said, I study political science. I didn't have the intention to actually go into social media platforms, but throughout my degree I learned a lot about why do we behave how we do online, and how much of it is just how social media platforms are designed, and how much of it is a cultural issue, or even to some extent a biological issue. And they've done a lot of research into fMRI testing, incredible insights into how do people behave how they do and why, most importantly. So today we're going to talk a bit about the introduction, the reality of this topic, the human cost, what sort of response can we expect, and if you're sat here today, how can you as an ally go forward and help really with this cause? So as I kind of touched upon our origin story, the Unite Against Online Abuse campaign is a now award-winning collaborative mission. And from the very beginning, our blueprint was to bring together governments, regulatory institutions, tech platforms, and fellow sports bodies with the object of tackling online abuse. And we'll come on to what is this definition and what does it mean. And really for us, it's all about installing change through society, through behavioural and regulatory measures. And it's a bold task. And I'm sure you've got loads of questions as to how can this work in such a global sort of environment, because it really varies from country to country, their responses. And our strategy from the start has rapidly changed because we have to respond to political changes as well. And we see those differences eke into sport. So we have to constantly be at the forefront of this wave. But the coalition was really born out of a need for a holistic strategy across sport. We realised a lot of sports were having a sort of becoming attuned to this topic, but were working in a very much a siloed approach. And so what we do is bring these people together to say, actually, share your knowledge. You know, we're one big sports body here, we're one big ecosystem, let's try and help each other out. So for defining online abuse, when we say online abuse, we envisage an umbrella. And really that covers anything from digital hostility to cyberbullying, right the way up to hate speech. And hate speech is at the top of the legal threshold, it's a criminal offence. Now the challenges here is that there is no single agreed definition of hate speech, which makes it incredibly hard to install action across the world. But if we were to synthesize all the definitions that are out there in research, it's commonly understood as hostile and malicious language targeted at a person or a group because of their perceived or actual innate characteristics. And there's a list of these sort of common characteristics on the screen. And in fact, I'm sure many of us have probably seen this discourse online. I think we're all familiar with these terms, but this is a non-exhaustive list. And it's not just about people who are experiencing this hate speech as the primary victim, but also the secondary impact in society, and also the fact that you witnessing it can have an impact on you as an individual. So it's much deeper than just that the victim sort of led narrative. It's a big part here in terms of the wider group that we deal with. So if we look at the key pillars of what UAOA is founded upon, so we now have 69 members, 39 endorsed members, and a further 39 affiliated sports federations. And these include names such as the governments of Australia, France, the United Nations, American football, esports, motorsport. And really, this is growing day in and day out. It's been 2 years since our inception. And that group are bound by a set of soft principles and a charter. And we strive to make this change, but we know it's a long journey ahead of us. And you can see on the screen here some of the key pillars we're founded upon. So really the first one is stronger together. It's all about the coalition, but the fact that sport transcends borders. And to me, that's really pivotal because everyone here, you're all part of the sports ecosystem. You're here for a passion and a reason, and therefore you have an influence in your own networks. And you have this ability to go global with that narrative. The second one is to be evidence-based. I think we've heard a lot about data, understanding, machine learning. And for us, online abuse is definitely under-researched. And we'll come on to some stats in a minute. But the representation there isn't across all sports. It's not across all subgroups in society. So there's a real lack of totally understanding what this problem actually is and how can we best support those individuals and make it accessible. And lastly, we have committed to action. It's quite easy to be performative when we talk about these sort of social impact topics, but really for us it's about discussing, agreeing and advancing concrete solutions. We've done some work with legal prosecutions, what does this look like, but also how do we support people from a mental health perspective, what's the aftercare system, and what's the legislative response in terms of federations. Now we're going to talk a bit about the landscape and what this looks like. And there's a lot going on, like I said, but this first one I want to pick up on is this figure here in the middle. So 46% of current research focuses on the US and the UK, but that represents only 5.07% of the world population. And that's misinforming how we're dealing with this problem. And even within that, so this was a literature review of 72 papers, only 8 sports were represented as well. And I'm pretty sure we could probably count up 8 different sports in this room alone, either that we watch, we're interested in, and that's not represented in this research. But online abuse does exist in other sports. And those 8 were predominantly football as we know, or soccer, American football, basketball, I think ice hockey might have been in there. But there's so much more to sport. I think we even spoke about cheer and the sort of impact there. And so there's a lot that we aren't seeing. And then the second figure here in the corner, 87% of sportswomen experienced some form of online harm in the past year. And that paper's from 2024. So this isn't outdated research, this is the current day. And the key thing here is it's not just elite level. We might think that elite performers are right in the public eye, but this is right the way down to grassroots. It's on that journey from grassroots to elite level. And is that really the message we want to be sending? That when you get to that final point of your career, you're pretty much going to experience some form of online harm or abuse based on the statistics that we know. And so we need to be preventative, we need to have systems in place, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the last thing on this screen is our youngest in society. So we do a lot of work with grassroots, understanding digital literacy skills, what does it mean for them? And on this figure here, so 49% of girls aged 11 to 21 fear sharing their views online. And I think we've spoken a lot about there being representation online. You have to see it to be it. And there are girls disengaging actively with content because they fear engaging in this conversation. And if we want to have them reach those elite levels of sport, we need to be addressing that as a society, whether that's through our networks, whether it's brands and sponsorship, or the athletes themselves as ambassadors. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what is the human impact here, and we've got 3 slides that highlight just some of the cases that I've seen come across my desk since starting this job in the last 2 years. You can see in the top corner here in motorsport, so our backyard, "I'll hunt you with a knife" is a comment that was posted on one of our F2 drivers' Instagram post, And that is just one of hundreds and thousands of comments that individual driver received. Now, what's scary here is, in fact, that when we were doing a lot of legal work in this space and sort of threat response and the matrix of where these threats are coming from, there was one comment that threatened a death threat, very similar to this one that you can see here, who actually had close proximity with the victim, who were in this VIP area, they were at the paddock, they were at the event, and they were 1 degree away from that person. Now, thankfully, nothing materialised from that, but the point is, how far will this go until that actually does materialise and we have a different headline to one that is a comment online to actual harm? We can also see here Kate in the bottom corner. She's a journalist who was commentating, doing her job and her sport, and she received a lot of abuse, particularly dehumanising her as an individual. And we can see whatever it is, it doesn't have friends. Kate removed herself from social media and now has actively put out there that she self-monitors the content she writes, the story she takes as a result of this abuse that she has received. But there's also another problem that sort of boils down in sport here, and that's the topic of betting, which is really interesting because particularly we do a lot of work with tennis and understanding what does online abuse look like there. And betting has proliferated online abuse in sport. And really, the stakes here are sinister and they're very personal. If we take the US alone, betting became legalized back in 2018 there. And Americans now wager $150 billion on sports betting a year. And I can tell you now, most of the outcomes are not profitable for them. So what do? They take to online platforms and they abuse individuals with death threats. And you can see here, so Venmo is like a tool where you can send money across in America. Someone's actually found an elite level person's Venmo account, and they've said, you need to give me $9,000 or I'll come after you and your family. So again, if you're on the receiving end of that, you feel like they're again right next to you. They found your Venmo account. Can they find your address? What is the situation here that's escalating? And again, where do you turn to? But there's a deeper crisis here when we think about the woman and the female lens there in the sense of their presence online. So I'm going to read a couple of stats that help paint a picture. More than 97% of female athletes reported that it was necessary for them to maintain a social media presence, of which 69% they needed that account for work, sponsorship, or their professional profile. So we know that females need to be in these spaces, and I think we've heard some great stories and great work here. But the sinister side to this is 81% said that experiencing online harm, online abuse, hate speech, in turn affected their economic opportunities. And that's the point which I have a personal passionate interest about, because we want parity in sport, we want females to be level in sport, to reach the same opportunities. But if you take sponsorship and having a digital community, if you feel like you can't be in those spaces, truly, is there parity and equality there if you're having to remove yourself? And it's a piece that's sort of come up recently. I've spoken to a lot of brands who sponsor athletes, and we were talking about it at lunch. I had one individual come up to me. She's a driver, she drives for Porsche. She had deep fakes made of her in the last few months, sexual deep fakes, and the brands that sponsored her couldn't tell whether they were true or not. And so it puts the athlete in an incredibly challenging position, but also the brand from a reputational point of view. And therefore, there's another crisis sort of going on, and how do we deal with that and make sure that both sides are well educated and supported? And lastly, from a broadcasting point of view, we have our very own Lee McKenzie here on TV, who's an F1 broadcaster. She's recently been undergoing some health battles, and she's been public about this on social media, but only because she received horrendous abuse online for how she looked. Now, Lee is a well-accomplished broadcaster. She's been in the paddock for many years. She's very talented, and this is the first time she felt like she had to say something because the abuse just got so bad. And there's one response that I want to highlight in some of our qualitative work that we've done. In that, one athlete experienced a pile-on of online abuse. So this could be, say, 100 tweets, and it happens one day, and then it never happens again. But that one athlete said she still felt the effects 10 years later. a mental point of view, a physical point of view, performance and commercial. And if you think about the peak of someone's career, is that 10 years the peak that they've worked towards to then have it damaged by online bullies, essentially? And that's really where we've sort of taken this opportunity to step in and lead this organisation. And lastly, on this side, that at an international sports governing body level, other sports federations and the sports I mentioned earlier, they believe, well, 90% of them believed that there's a risk of athletes and competitors withdrawing from participating. So it's a really deep entrenched problem here. But now that we kind of know the landscape, what can a response look like? And what are the positives here in this space? So I implore you to kind of go away and look at this in your own time and maybe educate yourselves in your own field. But at UAOA, I want to pick out 4 key areas we've been working on. So the first is that we created a dedicated educational module for over 18s to help them identify, understand the legal and ethical implications, and also supportive tools. Because the amount of people who aren't able to identify it but know it exists is one of the primary challenges that we have here. The second is in our sort of younger audiences under the age of 18, and that's to host digital literacy workshops with them, because at the moment they're growing up in a digital era, but they don't entirely know how to navigate themselves online. And particularly, we did some work with 120 girls in Valencia at the Motorsport Games. A lot of them, they don't start managing their accounts, and as they progress up to elite, sometimes they take them on before they get an agent of their own, and therefore their own experience is grossly changing year on year as they progress through their career. And so that's how we support those communities. Thirdly, we're doing a lot of work in terms of the organisational level and how can organisations respond and be ready in terms of their policy. And as such, on point 4, we're creating an audit dashboard in that all organisations can become compliant with a globalised standard in this topic. It's non-prescriptive in that people can opt in on the methods that best suit them, but we are there to support them at UAOA. And lastly, point number 7 here is we've recently been awarded EU funding to develop the first pan-European framework to combat online abuse in sport. And this includes the much-needed capacity building and awareness piece for the general public. And we're trialling this in Spain, Sweden, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic. And then it'll be rolled out across Europe and then tailored to each region across the world. Now, lastly from me, how can you get involved? And I know this is all very sobering sort of topic, but there is a way that we're able to make true change here. So last year we convened 75 VIPs in Paris to discuss and mobilise this topic. And what was incredibly inspiring about that event is that leaders are willing to make a change and to install that from the top down. This year, we're reconvening in September in Stockholm to discuss reclaiming the digital space. And the idea here is that delegates will be able to come and understand, by following a fictional case study, what do I need to do at the end of the day and what is my 360 response model. And notable sessions include hearing from TikTok, Microsoft, Notre Dame University, Getty Images. How do what we post online, how does that create discourse? What are TikTok doing in terms of their anti-hate measures? And again, as sports bodies, what are we doing to service our communities? I think we have time for a very short video, which I hope...
Welcome to the first United Against Online Abuse conference. We are all here today because we share a common goal to create a positive change.
This is a pivotal moment in time, and it's critically important that we're all working together to achieve positive outcomes in what is an important societal issue.
Any person who is subject to online abuse may find that that affects not only their performance but their mental health and their well-being.
The lawmakers in our countries are not fully sensitized of the seriousness of the problem, and they do not see it unless and until an actual crime is committed.
At UNESCO, we believe this is an important step to ensure protection.
I think this conference is very important because it gathers several stakeholders.
Le bien-être de nos athlètes, leur épanouissement, leur sérénité est absolument au cœur de nos missions.
It makes that 6 countries have signed, including Australia, Kenya, France, Greece, and Albania, and of course the lesser base, which is Costa Rica.
The more we are, the stronger we are, and the weaker they are.
To face this kind of issue, we have to be united, we have to be together.
And the importance of the UAOA coalition is to unite all these stakeholders in the industry.
The big takeaway for me is the idea that we all suffer the same experiences.
And each can hear the other's perspectives, they can share information.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So it's just a snippet there of some of the other sports who have been part of this mission. But my last message to you is that the culture of our society is set by the worst behaviour we're prepared to accept, and that worst behaviour might start online, but it doesn't end online. It leads to real-world implications on mental and physical health for everyone who is part of the sports that we know and love. So I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and I urge you as advocates to think about how you can spread this messaging. It doesn't have to be this grand gesture, it can be the person next to you, it can be your peer group, your organisation, and you're obviously more than welcome to register your interest to join us for the second conference to see how you can advance your own journeys in this space. That's all from me.